welcome to the Sports Jawn. This is Ryan Wolfson. In last segment, we talked about the quarterbacks that you'd want to draft for your fantasy draft. In this segment, we're going to be talking about a less glamorous position that won't score you as many points. We'll do 3 different positions. We'll be tight ends, kickers, and defenses. Let's just get right into it, and let's just start out with our tight ends. To me, there's probably 8 guys that if you had one of these 8 guys as your starting tight end, you feel very comfortable with, and you'll see my rankings. Who my top 8 are. They're the guys that I'm talking about. Talk about the top 8. First off is Tyler Warren from the Indianapolis Colts. Was a beast at Penn State. Shane Steichen said he's going to use him very similar to how he was used at Penn State. At Penn State, he was used as a quarterback, a tush-push quarterback, a short yardage quarterback, an uphill fullback. He was used at, obviously, his natural position at tight end, receiver, outside receiver in the red zone, slot receiver. He's also was even at one point used as a center. He won't be used as a center in the NFL, but he will be moved all around the field. So at a position where a good tight end might get 7 touchdowns, he should probably get you double-digit touchdowns. And in the previous 2 years, a rookie tight end was the number 1 tight end overall. Last year, Brock Bowers. Year before, Sam Laporta. If you're asking me to bet on a tight end to finish number 1 overall or in the top 5 that's a rookie, it would be Tyler Warren. The other guy I want to talk about is Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, pretty much when he's been healthy, has been top 12 tight end every year. He's going to an offense in Denver where Sean Payton heavily utilized Jimmy Graham as a key piece of his offense when he was in New Orleans. If you look at Denver right now, outside of Cortland Sutton, there's really no other veteran or young person presence at any other playmaking position that you're like, oh yeah, that guy's going to definitely get a lot of touches. Evan Ingram, I do expect to get a lot of touches. And that's why I just think he's one of those guys that might not be as glamorous of a name as some of these other guys. But if you told me he finished as a number 1 tight end of the season or top 3, I would not be shocked at all. Then the next tier to me is probably about 7 guys. And these are guys that have been consistently in the top 15 every year. Except for one who's a rookie. And I just like his upside. And that's Mason Taylor with the Jets. I'm not going to go too much into him. The guy that I really want to talk about, though, is Tucker Kraft from Green Bay. Green Bay doesn't really have a solid wide receiver core, in my opinion, one of the worst in the league. Jaden Reed, their number 1 receiver, is banged up. Christian Watson, who has been a starter for previous years, is out. They drafted Marquise Golden high in the draft this year. I expect him to play a big role. But they already said that Tucker Kraft, in his 3rd year, they expect to get him involved more this year. Previous years, he was kind of sharing time with Luke Musgrave at the tight end position. I expect him this year to overtake it. Last year, he finished as a top 12 tight end. Again, he could be one of those sneaky tight ends that could, if you told me at the end of the year was a top 5 tight end, I would not be shocked. Where it's just a bunch of guys who I think have upside, there could be some flyers there. The guy I really want to talk about the most is A.J. Barner from Seattle Seahawks. Noted as a blocking tight end coming out of Michigan last year. Did well in the time that he was allotted to him. With the new offensive coordinator there in Clint Kubiak, they're going to be a much more run-centric team, much more 2 tight end sets. And if you look at the receivers, they have Jackson Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp. Neither of them are red zone targets. He is the starting tight end, not the rookie Elijah Arroyo. He'll be the second one. Doesn't mean that he won't play an impact, Arroyo. Similar to how I think Loveland will play an impact, but Cole Kmet is clearly the starter. I just see that A.J. Barner could eventually, like I said, because of the red zone targets, I think Seattle's a very good team, very good offense. And Cooper Kupp, with his injury history, he could theoretically become the number 2 passing option on a top 15 offense. And I just think that's just a lot of upside for a young tight end. So that's my tight ends and how I break them down. If you have any questions or comments about the tight end position, please leave them in the comment section. Now let's talk about defenses. I'm only listing 12 defenses, just like I'm only going to list 12 kickers, because if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, you should only own one. If you own more than one, that's silly. There's going to be a couple things when I talk about kickers and defenses. For example, quarterbacks and tight ends, the previous two segments. Even though I do have some elite guys, I wouldn't be drafting quarterbacks or tight ends high. It's very, very rare that they pay off because usually what happens is that if you don't hit on your running backs and receivers because you're thinner, then your team suffers. So with that being said, defenses, there's elite defenses. There's teams that have easy schedules that I think are going to be on good teams. And then there's elite defenses that are on basically bad offensive teams that, might not do that well. You take all this into consideration. You should also take into consideration when drafting defensive kickers is the bye weeks. There's pros and cons to having early and late buys. A pro and a con to having an early bye week is that if you don't like your kicker or defense, you drop them and pick up the best available and ride that out, and hopefully until they have a bye week. Versus if you keep one that for example, if you have a kicker or defense that has a late round bye, and you don't even have to worry about it until the late round bye, so you can now focus all of your energy and your waiver wire attention and ad drops and free agent bidding money all on other positions early in the season, which is generally when free agents become available. So there's pros and cons to both. But let me just get right into the defense and kickers. The one defense that I want to talk about in this list, you'll see my list right here. It's the Seattle Seahawks. I just think they had a top 10 defense last year. I think they're going to get better this year. They could be one of those teams that in a year from now we're saying, wow, this defense is just stacked. I just really like what Seattle's done in the offseason. And I will tell you later, you'll see later how truly I feel about Seattle. But that's just the one team I just think is really, really, really talented, and I think could get up higher. If you look at the teams that I have bottom of my list, teams like the Bucks, the Patriots, the Colts, the 49ers, I think they're all going to basically be on teams that necessarily don't have great defenses, but will be winning a lot of games. Versus the team I have last, the Steelers, I think they have an elite defense, but I'm not sure if they're going to be winning a lot of games. So this is just something to kind of consider, again, when you're drafting defenses and kickers. This wraps up the defensive and special teams segment. The next segment will be kickers. Welcome back. This is, again, Ryan Wolfson from the Sports Jawn. In this segment, we'll be talking about kickers. Just like I said in the previous segment about defenses, in a 10-12 team league, I'm only listing 12. Why? Because you should only own one, and if you own more than one, you should drop the second one. As you will see on my list right here, who my kickers are. There's a couple strategies when going about kickers. Like I said, if you heard in the previous segment about bye weeks, there's pros and cons to drafting kickers early. Drafting kickers that have early bye weeks versus kickers that have later bye weeks. And again, if you want a breakdown of the bye weeks, look at my other segment about defenses where I'll break down the pros and cons of drafting a defense or kicker with an early or a late bye week. But the other thing to consider with kickers is a couple things. One is scoring offenses. You want them to be top 15 offenses, but you want the offenses to be more towards 15 than 1. The reason why is that means they'll attempt more field goal attempts versus extra point attempts, which means you'll be more likely to get more points. The other thing to consider too is the last few years there's been a lot more 50-plus and 60-plus yard attempts. In some leagues they're the same amount of points, some leagues they're different, but just seeing the accuracy of the distance of the further distance kicks are very important. Accuracy in general is important when looking at a kicker. You could look at a kicker that misses a lot of field goals but is on a high scoring offense. That could help you some weeks. That could hurt you some weeks because in most leagues you lose points for missed kicks. So with that being said, there's always going to be names that you don't really know about. But the one guy, and he's a popular name that I think could crack the top 10. The reason why he's a popular name, he's already made some preseason highlights, is Cam Little from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like I said to you before, I think they're going to be a top 15, going to be a very good offense, like a top 15 offense. But I think they're going to be kicking a lot more field goals than scoring touchdowns. Therefore, with his range, I think he's a safe bet to be a top 10 kicker. And with the upside, like I said, with his range in preseason, by the way, he made a 70-yard field goal with about 3 to 5 yards to spare. If he's able to kick 50-plus yarders on a regular basis pretty accurately, he could be a guy that from a week-to-week basis that could help you win games. Or what I mean, games, matchups in fantasy. So that wraps up the least glamorous positions: tight ends, defenses, and kickers. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will be talking about in other episodes. We'll be talking about the running back rankings, the wide receiver rankings, sleepers, and rookies for this year.